We are back breaking down the wide receiver position from a best ball redraft. If you guys are Dynasty contenders, you get some value out of this as well. We're going to be going through our top 48 wide receivers. We're going to go in depth probably on our top 24 or so and then kind of skim over the rest. This should be a fun exercise going through the redraft landscape for the first time in 2024. We're coming off the heels of the Dynasty offseason. Obviously, people are doing best ball drafts. People are getting ready to think about their redraft leagues with their home league buddies and all that kind of stuff. So we wanted to give you guys a first look, kind of a way too early top 48 wide receiver rankings for 2024 fantasy football. If you guys enjoy at any point, leave a like, subscribe if you guys are new around here. And also, if you get some value from this and you want to take this into action and support the channel, head on over to Underdog Fantasy, use the promo code FSE when you sign up, use these rankings that we're talking about and draft some early best ball teams. BBM 5 is going live right now, 15 million in total prizes, 1.5 million to first for a $25 entry. And the Pomeranian just went live today as we're recording this for a $3 entry if you guys are lower stakes players. So with that being said, let's get into it. Without further ado, let's get into the top tier of the wide receiver position in redraft. We got a ton of elite studs at the top. CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown. All of these guys solidified number ones of their offense. Elite alpha target earners, as well as just being elite real life receivers as well. With CeeDee Lamb, with Tyreek Hill, with Jamar Chase, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, you're getting access to some of the best offenses around the league. With Justin Jefferson, obviously the Vikings going through a bit of a transitional phase with Sam Darnold probably to start the season, or maybe JJ McCarthy gets in there early. But of course, we know Justin Jefferson, one of the best real life receivers in the league, going to command 170, 180 targets on the season. So it's hard to leave him out of this tier just because he's in the worst offense of this group. Is there anybody here that you want to really drill down on? I'm sure you're going to talk about CeeDee Lamb potentially being the 101 in PPR leagues. But with all these guys, I think you can really make the case that any one of them could have like a 23, 24, 25 point per game season.
So yes, the reason why I want to talk specifically about CeeDee Lamb, and I'll throw Tyreek Hill into this as well. The way I kind of have it ranked right now is I have CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill kind of in a slight tier above Chase, Jefferson, and Amon-Ra, both the combination of the great offenses that they played in and just how dominant they have been as fantasy wide receivers. I'll start off with CeeDee Lamb. I mean, this was a guy who broke out in his third year in the NFL. Everybody's like, you know what? We're accepting him into elite wide receiver territory. Over 1,300 yards, over 150 targets, was the wide receiver 5 in terms of pure finish in 2022. And people kind of viewed him as, well, that's exactly what he's going to be. He's going to be a 1,300, 1,400 yard wide receiver, maybe flirt with like 8 to 11 touchdowns. But it's clear as day that, Justin Jefferson Tyreek Hill is a tier above him from a real life superstar standpoint. Then he goes out last year, ludicrous season, 181 targets, nearly 1,800 receiving yards, leads the league in terms of receptions, 12 receiving touchdowns. I mean, Dak literally led the league in terms of passing touchdowns. And when you're talking about the projectability of being in a top 5 offense with really your only top competition for targets being Jake Ferguson, like there's a scenario where CeeDee Lamb has not only a legendary season, but like we're talking about potentially what Devontae Adams was doing in his prime, what Antonio Brown was doing in his prime. That is in the range of outcomes given the talent level of CeeDee Lamb, given the situation at hand. And let me run this stat over with you. So we know at the beginning of last year, Cowboys started a little bit, bad. They weren't really scoring in the red zone. First 6 weeks of the season, people were really asking, well, is Mike McCarthy's offense working? Is Dak Prescott the same quarterback? What are we expecting from this team? They hit that bye week in week 7. And let me read you off CeeDee Lamb's numbers week 8 on. So for reference, this is a guy that week 8 on averaged nearly 29 PPR points per game. We're not only talking about an elite difference maker, we're talking about a guy that in the last 8 weeks of the year outscored every other wide receiver by 8 points per game. That is even more than what Christian McCaffrey was doing at the running back position. Now, of course, with Tyreek Hill fully healthy, I expect him to be, combating with CeeDee Lamb for the top spot, but this may be one of the best wide receiver projections I've ever seen. It is just so clear to me that a 180 plus target, top 5 offense, elite superstar talent, he should be the 101 overall. Like, I understand how good Christian McCaffrey is, but I mean, we talked about it in the running back video. When I can get guys like Devon Achane on that turn, Josh Jacobs at that 2-3 turn, it makes my job of taking CeeDee Lamb at the 101 even more easy.
Yeah, I can make the argument for Tyreek Hill because you could
For sure.
definitely make the argument that he was the MVP of the NFL before he
Yeah.
started suffering some kind of like nagging injuries because of what he can provide down the field. It's tough to kind of group Chase Jefferson and St. Brown in with these guys, and like you said, there's kind of a bit of a mini tier with those dudes. Where Jamar Chase, he's kind of like the lower, slightly discounted version of Tyreek Hill, where you get the spike weeks, you get the big production, but he's not the
Yeah.
most consistent guy in the world unless we saw the Bengals offense really erupt this year. Joe Burrow have like kind of an MVP caliber season, which is definitely possible, which is why Jamar Chase to me is like the 103, 104, 105 off the board. And I really feel comfortable taking him at the top of drafts. So, I mean, I would say that, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, projectability wise, definitely deserve to be a slight tier ahead of these guys. But the age, between Chase and Hill is definitely something that you
For
could
sure.
argue as well. And the fact that the Bengals have Joe Burrow and the Dolphins have Tua Tagovailoa, they're also a more run heavy offense, the Dolphins, than the Bengals are. So again, I'll make some arguments for Chase at least having a chance to sniff that top tier. With Jefferson, I mean, if he had Kirk Cousins still, he would 100% be up there.
Yeah.
It's just with Sam Darnold and JJ McCarthy, we don't really know what to expect yet. So if we see JJ, I mean, just cooking in preseason and he wins the job week 1, it's possible that Justin Jefferson finishes as the wide receiver 1 this season. But we would need a monster CJ Stroud caliber season out of JJ McCarthy probably for that to happen. And then St. Brown, the guy that maybe gets forgotten about in this tier, maybe somebody doesn't view him quite to the level of these guys, but man, Amon-Ra St. Brown had a monster season last year. And the Detroit Lions, they have Jamison Williams to stretch the field. They lost Josh Reynolds in free agency. Sam Laporta, of course, had a great season. Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield. But at wide receiver, Amon-Ra St. Brown has as dominant of a hold on his receiving targets of his offense as any other receiver in the league.
Yeah, not name the top 2 guys, of course. I mean, CD and Tyreek are just so dominant, but agreed. Like Amon-Ra St. Brown, especially that schematic fit working in that Ben Johnson offense. I mean, he's really developed into that true alpha number 1 wide receiver rather than the kind of scheme dependent guy that people may have thought, specifically after his rookie season. People were saying, oh, he only owned targets because nobody's there. Well, we've seen Amon-Ra St. Brown truly take that step to elite wide receiver territory. And I'm glad you mentioned Justin Jefferson because obviously the quarterback play is keeping him out of that top 3 tier because the last time we saw him fully healthy, like he could very arguably be at the top of that tier because we're talking about, I mentioned with CeeDee Lamb, 181 targets, nearly 1,800 yards, 12 touchdowns. Well, Justin Jefferson in the last season, he played 17 games in 2022, 184 targets, 128 receptions, 1,800 receiving yards, 8 receiving touchdowns. So just goes to show you that the talent is absolutely there. And if JJ McCarthy can take that step, the talent that I think he has in his disposal, that fit with that Kevin O'Connell offense, being able to throw the ball down the field to Justin Jefferson, I mean, he could very well enter that top tier. It's just knowing it's a rookie quarterback, you kind of have to downtick him down to this tier 1B or tier 2, if you will.
Yeah, I will say, fighting back on your point about CeeDee Lamb versus Amon-Ra St. Brown, Amon-Ra's target share has been higher than Lamb's in 2 straight seasons. So he does absolutely. It's just that the Cowboys throw the ball more.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
CeeDee Lamb's going to have more overall targets than opposed to a target share. But these 5 guys, we don't need to tell you guys these guys are good. Like, that they're good already. And all 5 of these guys, I would spend a top 8 overall redraft pick on. The only non-wide receivers I would take in the top 8 are Christian McCaffrey, who I have ranked at number 1 overall right now, who I would personally take over Lamb and Hill, but heavy PPR formats, wide receivers, heavy kind of rooms, I'd be okay taking those receivers over Christian McCaffrey. Bijan Robinson, who I have at number 5 overall, just behind Jamar Chase and the other 3 receivers, and Christian McCaffrey, and then Breece Hall, who I have at number 6 overall, just ahead of Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown there. So actually, technically, all these guys are all top 7 or top 8 picks for me.
Yeah, so the way I currently have it laid out, so CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill are my 1st and 2nd overall player, specifically because I view them in terms of at their position being in that area with Christian McCaffrey, but it's more so a structural thing, knowing what I look at running back. The 2-3 turn, I love all the running back projections. Don't necessarily like all the wide receiver projections. So that's kind of the tiebreaker for why I'd prefer those 2 wide receivers. Then I have Christian McCaffrey at 3, Chase Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, pretty similar. I view them in that tier with Bijan and Breece. And I would prefer to just take the wide receiver structurally, especially at the top of my drafts. And then, like you said, Bijan and Breece would finish out my top 8.
Yeah, it's really, do you want Christian McCaffrey and Mike Evans, or do you want CeeDee Lamb and Devon Achane? It's like kind of where you're at with the value bundles there. So,
if you watch the running back rankings video, you know my thoughts on Devon Achane.
Yeah, and for me, I could just slot in Josh Jacobs there, and it would be the kind of the same reasonable argument that you can make. I would rather potentially have CeeDee Lamb and Josh Jacobs or Tyreek Hill and even potentially Jonathan Taylor sliding beyond that point or something like that. So, 1-2 turn picks, the next tier wide receivers we have. We're going to have a little bit of disagreement in this tier. In this tier, we got New York Jets wide receiver Garrett Wilson, A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles, Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams, Marvin Harrison Jr., rookie wide receiver now of the Arizona Cardinals, the highest we've ever definitely had a rookie wide receiver ranked in redraft. Brandon Ayuk, wide receiver of the 49ers, and Drake London, Atlanta Falcons wide receiver. So, I mean, holistically looking at this tier, you got some proven guys, A.J. Brown, Puka Nacua last year had a monster season as a rookie. Brandon Ayuk had a great breakout season too, was a top 10 receiver. Then you got kind of projections with Garrett Wilson, with Marvin Harrison Jr., and with Drake London. I'll start. I mean, Garrett Wilson, it's a pretty easy start for him. He's been so productive. He's been so good on his, I would say, limited opportunity, even though he's commanding an elite target share. He was playing with Zach Wilson for outside of 4 snaps the entire season last year. 30.1% target share was better than CeeDee Lamb's target share last year. So we're talking about a guy that was dominating his offense. They have Malachi Corley, and they don't have a whole lot going on in the Jets wide receiver core outside of Garrett Wilson. So I feel really good about, now that Aaron Rodgers is back, now that they've added pieces to the offensive line, a guy that led the NFL in overall routes run last year too, Garrett Wilson. When he's out there running routes, Aaron Rodgers will probably be dropping back quite a bit this year. I feel really good about Garrett Wilson's potential to ascend all the way to a 20-plus point per game wide receiver. And if you're getting that at the back of the first round, early in the second round, depending on the room, I feel pretty good about him. And then I'll talk about Drake London too, because he kind of is the same type of projection, both top 10 picks in the 2022 wide receiver class, both getting big-time quarterback upgrades. Drake London getting Kirk Cousins, who's been a wide receiver kingmaker his entire career pretty much. He's obviously most recently credited with Jefferson being able to become a 180, 190 target guy. Drake London is the alpha of this offense. He always has been. Kyle Pitts was injured last year. Maybe he's a little bit better. Bijan Robinson and the running game are going to do their thing. This is a Rams-like scheme. They're a pass-heavy type of situation that we're looking at, and that is a far cry from what we've seen with Arthur Smith. This is an offense that had been like a 450 pass attempt team, and Drake London and the Falcons and Kirk Cousins and Penix as the backup there could be dropping back 600 plus times this year. And at 30% target share, we could see a monster breakout season from London.
So let me ask you this question, because specifically you mentioned Garrett Wilson first. I want to ask you something without you having to search it up. In the first 2 seasons of Garrett Wilson's career, keep in mind he played 34 games. How many total targets do you think he's commanded in those 34 games?
305.
315. 315 targets in a wide receiver's first 2 seasons. We are legitimately talking about a superstar level target commander. And I actually think there was a stat I believe I saw on Twitter. Correct me if I'm wrong. Leave it down in the comment section. But Garrett Wilson has commanded the most targets through 2 seasons of his career in NFL history. In NFL history, we're talking about up there with the all-time greats. In NFL history, this guy has commanded the most targets in his first 2 seasons. He has the elite talent, and if you believe in Aaron Rodgers being able to get back to that level he was pre-Achilles tear, you could be arguing he's a tier 2 low.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for us, we're tempering expectations for Rodgers, putting him down here because we know he's better than Zach Wilson. That we know for sure, but we don't know if he's going to be the Aaron Rodgers of Green Bay. And I'm just fact checking you really quick on one thing because Justin Jefferson had 292 targets through his first 2 seasons because he was the first name that popped into my mind that would be kind of comparable to Garrett Wilson at 125 targets his rookie season, 167 targets his second year. So Garrett Wilson, awesome projection. A.J. Brown and Brandon Ayuk, there's not really much I have to explain about these 2 guys. They're both in run-heavy offenses, so they get dinged a little bit.
Very similar.
They're both number ones. There's other talented playmakers in their offense, but they're big play threats. They're the type of guys that are going to score touchdowns. They're going to have a high yards per reception. I very much trust the Philadelphia Eagles to score points. I very much trust the San Francisco 49ers to score points. But you have to rank them as back-end wide receiver ones because the target competition and the pass heavy or the run heavy nature of their offenses, you can't really get them any higher.
100%. And the way I kind of view A.J. Brown and Brandon Ayuk, and I'll get into my own argument for Puka and Marvin Harrison in a second here, but with A.J. Brown and Brandon Ayuk, they are very steady mid to back end wide receiver 1 projections with the implied upside that if an injury happened to Devontae Smith or an injury happened to Christian McCaffrey, they have elite wide receiver 1 type of upside. So they're kind of like the implied players where their floors are high enough to take them in the top 15 of your drafts, but their ceiling case most likely would have to do with an injury on their team, whether that's Christian McCaffrey or whether that's a guy, like I said, with Devontae Smith. I'll make the arguments quickly for Puka Nacua and for Marvin Harrison Jr. Full disclosure, Corey's a little bit lower than me on Puka Nacua, hence why he said there's a little bit of disagreement in this area. I'm honestly just incredibly optimistic about this Rams offense. I've said all along that as long as Matthew Stafford is healthy, I view him as a top 7 to 8 real life talent at the position in the NFL. And I keep coming back to the fact that, yes, you can pull up the splits of Puka and Cooper Kupp when they were on versus off the field with each other. But just from a projectability standpoint, if Matthew Stafford is fully healthy, I think he can fully reach 30 plus passing touchdowns like he did in that Super Bowl run year where he threw 41 touchdowns. And when you're looking at the rest of the ancillary pass catchers on that Rams offense, if Matthew Stafford's throwing 30 plus touchdowns, if this Rams offense with Stafford is throwing the ball 550 plus times, Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp realistically can command a 60% target share between them, because I really do feel like that's how consolidated this receiving core is.
Yeah, I'm not low on Puka Nacua in terms of like the player. I think he's a good player, but I do think that the 17.6 PPR points per game that he put up last year is a smidge inflated, which is, again, full disclosure, a rookie receiver putting up that kind of season is absolutely incredible. But he was 15.76 points per game with 3 less targets per game when Cooper Kupp was healthy in the 12 games. And also, too, like Cooper Kupp wasn't really totally healthy all 12 of those games. He had some games where he was limited in snaps and that kind of thing. Again, I'm very bullish on this Rams offense as well. I think both of them are going to be the clear number 1 and number 2, respectively. I just think Cooper Kupp should be closer to Puka Nacua in the overall rankings. So, I mean, consensus says Puka Nacua is like wide receiver 6 and Cooper Kupp is like wide receiver 23 or something. To me, it's like Puka Nacua is like wide receiver 8 and Cooper Kupp is like wide receiver 16. Like, I think they should be really close. And I think both of these guys could have monster seasons.
The Ram stack may be one of my favorite stacks to realistically get at value at this point, because you have such a consolidated target share. If you go with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, let's say you get like the 111 in your draft, you draft Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp falls to you at the end of the 3rd, and then you're able to get Stafford later on. Like, you know exactly where the targets are going in that offense. There's no we saw Demarcus Robinson pop up a couple times, specifically when Cooper Kupp was hurt. But if both those guys are on the field together, you know that it's going to be a very condensed target share. And realistically, I'm higher on both of these guys. I have Puka as my wide receiver 6, and I have Cooper Kupp as my wide receiver 17. They're currently going off the board as Puka's wide receiver 6, Cooper Kupp going as the wide receiver 24 right now on Underdog. And I understand the pessimism given the age. Heck, we've mostly been the wary, stay away from old injured receiver guys in the past, but it's more so if Cooper Kupp was valued as like the wide receiver 13, we would stay away from him. The fact that he's the wide receiver 24 really doesn't make sense, considering he has league-winning type of upside at that spot.
Yeah, I hated Cooper Kupp last year. He was like a top 5 pick. I was like, no way would I draft him that high. And even when he slid, I was like, he's still going in like the 2nd round or whatever. Like, I wasn't down for it all. But this year, I think we've gone a little bit too far to the other direction. I mean, we've had this, we're not going to rehash this conversation, but I think the Rams are a really, really good team. And I think they could be a top team in the NFC as a result of that. So I'm high on the offense in general. Marvin's the one guy we didn't talk about. Probably have to explain ourselves a little bit, because he is a rookie, right? We've never seen a rookie receiver be ranked this high, this early on in the redraft.
We've never seen a rookie receiver like Marv.
No, we have not. We have never seen a rookie receiver like this. He is the number 1 receiver prospect in the FSC prospect model since 2016. Walking in, basically the same exact situation CeeDee Lamb is in, really. Yeah. Like, you walk into a situation where you got no other receiving targets outside of a tight end in Trey McBride, and Kyler Murray has fed his number 1 receiver when DeAndre Hopkins was there over 10 targets per game when DeAndre Hopkins was healthy and on the field. So I think with Marvin, like, it's crazy to say this about a rookie receiver. The bar has never been so high for rookie receivers to produce. I'd be shocked if he didn't have 150 targets his rookie season.
I'd be shocked as well. And it's funny when you think about it, because you're going to get people in the comment section like, how are you going to take a rookie at this high? Like, how much higher can he even finish than this? Well, guess what? Taking Marv as the wide receiver 9, if he finishes as the wide receiver 5, that's basically 3 to 4 points per game over expectation versus what you're drafting him. 3 to 4 over expectation points per game is the difference between a league-winning player and the difference between a steady wide receiver 1. There is a big difference here. And Marvin Harrison Jr. is the type of talent, is in the type of situation, has the type of potential volume to not only be the head of this tier of the 1-2 turn picks, but downright be in the middle of the elite studs tier. I really do feel like that is in the range of outcomes, hence why we're drafting him at that 1-2 turn.
This is an outrageous take, but he could outscore Justin Jefferson this year. He
Very
could
well.
legitimately do it.
Very
Like
well.
it's possible. And if this was 2017, you would probably get Marvin Harrison in the 5th or the 6th round, and he could just be a massive smash league winner if this was the same projection. But the reality is, sites like Underdog and FFPC and all
Too
these
sharp
sharper
now.
ADPs, like we're too sharp to let Marvin Harrison fall beyond where he's supposed to be going, which is as a back end wide receiver 1. You have him wide receiver 9. I have him wide receiver 10. This is exactly where he belongs to go. Let's move on to the next tier of wide receivers here. We got Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, Nico Collins, Jalen Waddle, Chris Olave, Malik Neighbors, and Cooper Kupp. So a lot of very talented number 2 wide receivers in this area, right? You got Mike Evans and Adams are both like the steady Eddie veterans who have been number 1 wide receivers for a long time. We know what to expect out of those guys. If anybody's concerned about Devontae Adams getting 160 plus targets this year, you probably shouldn't be. What you should be concerned about is the offense. It's probably not going to be very good. And then with Mike Evans, we know he's pretty much a locked and loaded 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns every single year, because that's basically what he's done his entire career. And I'm not really concerned about anything else going on in Tampa Bay. Him and Baker had a good connection last year. We all saw it. Chris Godwin, even if he's a little better this year, I'm not really that concerned for Mike Evans. And then, like I said, Jalen Waddle, Cooper Kupp, 2 of the best number 2 receivers in fantasy football next year. Yeah. Tether yourself to good offenses, concentrated offense, to your point. Both the Dolphins and the Rams, probably 60% of the targets, 55% of the targets are going to 2 players.
Yeah, 100%. And the other guys we didn't talk about here is what? Nico Collins, Chris Olave, and Malik Neighbors, right? I'll take care of those guys. So with Nico Collins, I mean, I think he's on the trajectory to be a superstar level wide receiver. Matt Harmon seems to think so as well. We saw how he was performing down the stretch, specifically in the playoff game last year. We really saw Nico Collins against that Cleveland Browns defense that was number 1 in the league across the entire year absolutely decimate them. That Texas offense was absolutely humming in that game. And at this point, I think Stephon Diggs is not quite the player that people thought he was last year. Going into the season, he was a first-round redraft pick. I definitely feel like maybe it's the age, maybe it's, just natural progression. Regardless, I feel like he's an inferior player going into this season than he was going into last season. Tank Dell coming off the injury, and I think he's a fine ancillary, wide receiver 2-3 type. But it really just comes back to the fact that I think Nico Collins is a superstar potential level X wide receiver and an offense with a quarterback that can throw over 35 touchdowns. I can't say more than 5 to 6 quarterbacks in the league have 35 plus passing touchdowns in their range of outcomes, but CJ Stroud is absolutely one of them. Nico Collins is your 6'3", 200 plus pound, big time X wide receiver where 15 plus touchdowns is in the range of outcomes from Nico Collins, and you can't say that about many other wide receivers. Mike Evans is one of the few. The difference is I think Nico Collins has a higher projectable yardage total than what I think Mike Evans has coming into the year. Again, they are both in the same tier for me, but because I have so much confidence in this Texans offense and Nico Collins' status as that true number 1 wide receiver for CJ Stroud, he's my wide receiver 12 right now.
Yeah, I think some people might look at this situation and be like, well, Stephon Diggs, more of a proven target earner. Tank Dell was great when he was on the field, and Nico Collins, was not as good once Tank Dell went down. Sorry, Nico Collins got a little bit better and he had more spike weeks, but Nico Collins only had a 23% target share last year. It's not like he was dominating targets like 35% or anything like that. Like he was just Brandon Ayuk in this offense. Essentially, it's the same scheme. It's the same coaching staff. He's the Brandon Ayuk of this offense, and CJ Stroud is a excellent quarterback and a better quarterback than Brock Purdy. And to me, he's still the number 1 guy that I want from this team. I think Diggs is a solid potential value depending on the league. Maybe he's overdrafted based on name, but if you can get him in the 4th, 5th round, he's a fine pick there. Tank Dell's a fine pick in the 5th, 6th round, but I want Nico Collins probably in the 3rd more so than in the 2nd. I think late 2nd, early 3rd is where I start to consider him.
I have him a little bit higher than you. So he's a mid-second rounder for me. I'd be comfortable taking him upwards of like the top 18 or so, just because I do think it's in the range of outcomes. We could be talking about him as a 1st round overall redraft pick next year. Like I really do. And if that's the case, like I don't really view the guys in my 3rd round area outside of maybe like Devon Achane, or we're going to talk about Malik Neighbors in a second, as really having that true upper ceiling potential to be a 1st round redraft pick.
Yeah, it's tough with Collins because like if I was starting my draft with like Lamb or Hill or one of these top guys, I swung back around in round 2 and I wanted to grab Collins for some upside, or hell, maybe I could even get him in the 3rd round, grab a Josh Jacobs in the 2nd, and then Nico at the top of the 3rd. Like that would be such a great start to your draft. I really do think that picking early on in the draft, as well as picking in the middle of the first round are both really, really good spots to be picking from. As much as I think, starting your draft, Garrett Wilson and Saquon Barkley would be great, I think that at the end of the third, fourth round area, you're probably going to be looking at a more barren board than if you get 3 players in that top 6 overall. To me, I think one of the best spots to pick from is like 6 or 7, because you should be able to hit all the tier breaks of first round, second round, and third round.
Yeah, I mean, I like picking in the top 3 because I do view the top 3 as kind of separating from the bunch. But like you said, the big difference here this year is that the early third round is just so much better than the late third round. Like, it's actually not even funny. We're talking about, Nico Collins, Jalen Waddle, Malik Neighbors, Chris Olave. And again, we would have Cooper Kupp in that area, but he's the only player that outside of the 3-4 turn I'd feel comfortable kind of taking in the third round. Because once you get down to like Debo, DJ Moore, T. Higgins, Devontae Smith, like, we'll talk about those guys in a second, but they're very clearly under this tier of wide receivers, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would rather get those guys in round 4 if I possibly could. And like we talked about in the running back video, but like the Pachecos and the those type of guys in that mid to or early to mid third range also makes a lot of sense. And that's why you kind of want to, if you can secure 3 players, like start your draft, CeeDee Lamb, Nico Collins, Devon Achane, it's like that feels pretty damn good. Dream. So, I mean, Chris Olave is kind of similar to Mike Evans and Devontae Adams, just like the offense is not quite as good as you'd want it to be, but he is clearly the number 1 receiver there. If you get a half decent season out of Derek Carr, he throws like 25 touchdowns and like 4,200 yards, you'd probably have a really good season out of Chris Olave. It's just like, how do we project that offense to be? Because me and you went back and forth on this for a long time on Chris Olave last year. Yeah. And what was I talking to you about all the time? I was talking about how much are the New Orleans Saints going to throw the ball? You actually ended up being right. They threw the ball 606 times last year. And I didn't think that was going to happen. I thought they were going to throw the ball a lot less. And for whatever reason, maybe they were just down in game scripts or whatever the case
Kamara,
was.
Bro.
Yeah, they ended up throwing. But that's the other thing, is that they just checked the ball down to Kamara instead of running the ball because they couldn't run it very well. So with Olave, maybe the addition of the left tackle in the draft really helps out their passing game or whatever. I find it hard pressed to think that Olave is going to be much better than like wide receiver 15 to 12 in points per game.
And that's where I'm at with Olave. Again, we're going to be lower on consensus. For the record, he's actually the last of this tier. I'll kind of read off my order, and then you could rip off yours in a second. But so we already talked about London. We already talked about Ayuk. They're my 10 and 11. Once we get down to this area, I have it ranked Nico, Adams, Evans, Waddle. We're going to talk about Malik Neighbors in a second, but Malik Neighbors, Cooper Kupp, and then Chris Olave is my last of this group. Simply because when I'm talking about projectable ceilings, can they win me a fantasy football league? I don't necessarily see that in the range of outcomes for Chris Olave. Can I think he can be a back end wide receiver 1? Absolutely. Can he be the wide receiver 6 or higher? I don't really think so. Now, with Malik Neighbors, you could make the argument that he's also got a bad situation there with New York, and I really wouldn't fight you on that, but he's the guaranteed number 1 in that offense. And from a talent perspective, he was just under Marvin Harrison. The difference, of course, Marvin Harrison landing with Kyler Murray, better projectable offense. He's going to be valued higher in redraft. But Malik Neighbors is that level of superstar talent that I think he is. He can overcome the situation. He could be a 150, 160 target receiver, because outside of him, man, who's going to be commanding the targets on that Giants offense? We have a proven target commander at LSU playing with another top 25 overall pick. We'll talk about in a little bit with Brian Thomas Jr. with Malik Neighbors, and he should have won the Biletnikoff. Like, we're talking about one of the best wide receiver prospects we have seen in the last 15 years. So the fact that he lands on the Giants keeps him in this early third round area, because to be honest, if he lands in a better landing spot, like he lands even with like the Tennessee Chargers, even the Tennessee Titans, like Malik Neighbors is a second round pick.
Yeah, if he had gone 5th overall to the Chargers and they didn't take Joe Alt or whatever, I bet Malik Neighbors would probably be going like 2 or 3 picks after where Marvin is going.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and that's very well where he should be. So what I keep coming back to the fact is we kind of know what Olave is, and we don't know what Malik Neighbors is yet. Could he be, a very similar projection to Olave where the situation is leveling him down? Sure. Could he be Odell Beckham Jr.? I know that sounds crazy, but to me, that's in the range of outcomes.
Yeah. And maybe the reason Daniel Jones has looked like a pedestrian quarterback for a while is because he's never had a guy like this. He's never had a wide receiver like this. And maybe he improves the offense that much. Even though they lost Saquon Barkley, I think Malik Neighbors has a chance to really elevate that offense. So again, in managed leagues, I would rather get Malik Neighbors in the 4th if I could possibly help it. Because like maybe you start your draft, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Brandon Ayuk, Josh Jacobs or Isaiah Pacheco, and then you grab Malik Neighbors. He's like your fourth pick. He's a guy that you can use as a swing and you can go a little safer later. But if you have to take him, like you have to take him in the third on underdog because people understand the late season upside and that kind of thing. And I'm okay doing it. I would prefer to get him in the late third, early fourth if I could possibly help it. So the next tier guys that we're going to talk about here, Debo, DJ Moore, T. Higgins, Devontae Smith, Amari Cooper, Zay Flowers, and Stephon Diggs. Again, more talented number twos here. T. Higgins, we know what to expect by now. He was injured last year. I'm not really that concerned about it. I think he's just going to be the number two in Cincinnati. They throw the ball a ton. Jamar Chase is going to get his, but I'm fine with it. Devontae Smith, don't throw the ball quite as much as Cincinnati, but he's a great player, and he's closer to A.J. Brown as a talent than T. Higgins is to Jamar Chase, so he's obviously going to have a lot of upside there. And then you got these like Debo as well. He's in a run-heavy offense, kind of the number two receiver, going to get some rushing work. DJ Moore and Amari Cooper and Zay Flowers are probably number one receivers for their respective teams, but you kind of have some concerns with each guy. DJ Moore has a little bit more target competition, has a rookie quarterback. Amari Cooper, Deshaun Watson's a bit of a wild card, and then Zay Flowers has Mark Andrews to compete with, and he's kind of in a run-heavy offense.
Lower volume. Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of funny. Obviously, Deebo Samuel, is he the overall best real-life wide receiver? I feel like he's been overrated, at least for the last couple of years. But what he has that a lot of wide receivers don't have is equity in his rushing game and the best rushing game in the league. Like, not many receivers we can peg for 4 to 5 rushing touchdowns, 300 to 400 rushing yards. Deebo Samuel is one of them. So although he's not going to be this dominant 1,200 plus, 1,300 plus yard receiver like he was a few years ago, even if he's only at 800, 900 receiving yards and he gives you some on the ground with some rushing touchdowns, that supplements a much higher floor. So I wanted to rank him lower than this, but objectively looking at it, with his role in that offense as that do-it-all threat behind the line of scrimmage, yards after catch plan, I trust Kyle Shanahan to be able to get the best out of Deebo Samuel, which is why I keep him up here. DJ Moore, to me, is kind of just like a Walmart version of A.J. Brown and Brandon Ayuk in the sense that he's not quite as good of a receiver as those guys, and the offense isn't quite as good of a projection. As much as I love Caleb Williams, as much as I think this Chicago Bears offense can be very good, it's very easy to bank on the Eagles offense. It's very easy to bank on the San Francisco offense. And even though I think the Bears offense can potentially get to that someday, it's hard to say a rookie Caleb Williams is instantly going to be an MVP candidate.
Yeah, not to mention Keenan Allen and Romo Dunze can earn targets too. And that's the other thing with DJ Moore. He was if I was getting last year's DJ Moore only with Caleb Williams, he would be higher than this, except they brought in other talented receivers to help compete for targets with him. One thing I wanted to say about Zay Flowers real quick is people are underrating just how good his rookie season was. He scored elite in reception perception. Beating zone coverage. Harmon has charted 21 receivers this offseason, including the aforementioned Stephon Diggs, who was traded, Mike Evans, who was a free agent. Anybody that was a free agent or a second-year wide receiver, basically he's charted. And Zay Flowers beat zone coverage last year at the best rate of anybody and beat man coverage the second best rate. So we're looking at a guy that legit knows how to get open. He left some plays on the field too. Like, I don't know if you remember that long touchdown that Odell Beckham got called for a hold on the Thursday night game or the Monday night game or whatever it was. But like, if Zay Flowers scores that touchdown, we're talking about a guy instead of 12.9 points per game has like 13.7 points per game. And his rookie season even looks a little bit better. So I think Zay Flowers has a lot of upside. He kind of almost reminds me a little bit of like Jalen Waddle entering his second year, where you got, an offense that's not going to, obviously like it's going to be a little bit of a different situation. And Tyreek was brought in to the Dolphins. But I think the progression of Jalen Waddle going from like a 12.9 point per game guy to like a 15 point per game guy as a second year player, I could see Zay Flowers kind of having like a 15 point per game season this year and returning on the 4th, 5th round price tag that you're paying for him. And same goes for Amari Cooper too. Can you guess how low the Browns ranked in pass offense DVOA last year?
How low? So Dorian Thompson-Robinson played a little bit. Obviously, Deshaun Watson, when he played, wasn't the best. Joe Flacco had a couple games, but he also had a couple stinkers. 27th overall.
It's exactly where they ranked. So 27th overall. We're talking about an offense that had bottom 6 quarterback play essentially last year. And Amari Cooper still did his thing. He still had, a wide receiver 21 or 18 finish. I can't remember exactly where he finished.
Amari Cooper is so confusing. Amari Cooper is so confusing because when he was on the Cowboys, he was arguably the most overrated receiver in the league. He goes to Cleveland, does better than he did on the Cowboys, and gets way cheaper.
Yeah, dude, he's 15.1 PPR points per game last year. Dude, he averaged 17.5 yards a catch last year on the Browns offense that couldn't move the ball because they didn't have Nick Chubb. They didn't have their starting quarterback. Like, this team, again, I'm so sick of buying into Deshaun Watson and thinking that he's going to be good, but they can't be worse as a passing offense than they were last year, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Amari Cooper, very good projection. You already mentioned the other names. T. Higgins, big play upside, touchdown equity. If he stays healthy, obviously that's the big bugaboo. If T. Higgins was fully healthy, he's realistically at least in the tier above. So
Yeah, he's him and Waddle are essentially the same, because the difference between like Waddle, Smith, and Higgins is that Waddle and Smith are in offenses that are going to throw 525 times, and Higgins has a chance. His quarterback Burrow could throw like 45 touchdowns on an outlier season, right? Like if Burrow had a monster MVP caliber season, which I think both of us agree that he's capable of doing as a passer, then T. Higgins could catch like 12 touchdowns that year.
Like realistically, there's only a handful of quarterbacks that have like 40 plus touchdown season in the range of outcomes. And that list is like Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, CJ Stroud, Dak Prescott, Jordan Love. Like we're talking about a rarefied air of guys that even hit 30 plus touchdowns. The fact that we're talking about guys that can legitimately hit 40, 45 scores just speaks volume to the overall value of pocket passers for these wide receivers in terms of their fantasy value.
Yeah, I think the Bengals, you mentioned the Rams is a stack you're going to love. I'm going to love the Bengals stack, man, this year, because I think you're getting a slight discount on Chase, getting him like, between the 104 and the 108 in most redraft leagues and most underdog drafts. You can get T. Higgins comfortably in the 4th, 5th round. And then Burrow also going a little bit lower than he usually goes to in like the 6th, 7th round.
Yeah, sorry, correction too. Assuming health, Stafford is absolutely in that group as well. I mean, we literally saw him throw 40.
Yeah, we saw him do it like 2 years ago. So yeah, definitely possible. Again, this tier, all pretty solid guys. The one guy we didn't mention really is Stephon Diggs, who it's tough to gauge him, man, because like if he was going to play like 2021 Stephon Diggs, he would be the number 1 on Houston, and he would probably be going a lot higher than he's going. But as we kind of already talked about with Nico Collins, I think that the role that Nico Collins is going to play in this offense is going to be more valuable than the role that Stephon Diggs is going to play. I think Diggs is going to be your PPR 95 receptions for 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns type of guy. And that's going to be fine. That's going to be a solid wide receiver 2. Maybe he finishes wide receiver 22 in points per game or something like that. I just think that people are going to overrate him a little bit because of name value. How good has Stephon Diggs been? He's been good a long, long time. And everybody's going to be like, oh, he's on the Texans. He's got CJ Stroud, top 10 upside. I don't think at this point in his career, he has that kind of ceiling. I think we're looking more so at like a better version of what DeAndre Hopkins was last year with the Titans.
Yeah, so if we're looking at his reception perception in the last 2 years, so with Stephon Diggs, if I find his reception perception from 2022 versus 2023, I have the 2023 pulled up. Let me grab the 2022. In 2022, we're talking about a wide receiver that ranked 97th percentile, 96th percentile, 96th percentile. Legitimately one of the best 3 to 5 wide receivers in the game of football. Was he solid last year? Was he a top 10 fantasy wide receiver? Absolutely. But like I said, 97, 96, 96, according to Matt Harmon's reception perception. You translate that to the last season, is literally the latest season we've seen him playing football in the NFL for the Buffalo Bills last year. That dropped to 76, 67, 75. Now, do I think Stephon Diggs can still be a very productive wide receiver? Do I think Stephon Diggs can still very easily be a top 2 target on a top 5 offense in the league and be very worth a 3rd round, 3-4 turn type of pick? Absolutely. But if the market sentiment is you're getting potentially Stephon Diggs from 2 years ago, I just simply don't think he's that same player anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, Harmon basically says that like he'll be better in an ancillary role than he will be in,
which is the role he'll play.
Yeah, exactly. That's perfect. And if you can't figure out how to dissect this receiver room, just draft CJ Stroud. Honestly, like that's the way that you just get the syrup, not the pancakes, or whatever the expression is. The guy that goes over all of them. Stephon Diggs is a guy that is very hard to gauge, because I think in home leagues he's going to go really high because of name value. On underdog, he already goes a little higher than I'm willing to take him for stacking purposes and all that kind of thing. So for me, like if I'm faced with the decision, I'm going to take guys like Zay Flowers over him, Amari Cooper over him, guys like that don't currently go ahead of him. By the way, they go after him at this point.
For sure. So in terms of my tier, like I said before, Olave was my 18. To dissect this area, I would have it as Devontae Smith as my 19, DJ Moore as my 20, Deebo Samuel as my 21, Amari Cooper as my 22, a guy we'll be talking about in a second as my 23, and then T. Higgins as my 24. Right on the outside looking in, Stephon Diggs, Zay Flowers as the head of the next year at 25 and 26 for me.
Yeah, for sure. Like all these guys are kind of just like back end wide receiver twos. The next tier of guys is kind of like low end wide receiver two, high end wide receiver three types, which is what you're taking kind of in that round 4 through 6 range, depending on how heavy of a wide receiver room you are in. You got Pittman, Pickens, Christian Kirk, Tank Dell, DK Metcalf, Jaden Reed, and then Romo Dunze as the lone rookie in this tier. With Pittman, I've kind of documented my thoughts on Pittman on a number of occasions. I think that Josh Downs is a proven target earner. I think that Anthony Richardson is maybe not the best passing quarterback for what Michael Pittman's going to do well. And I think the offense is going to be run heavy. So I'm a little bit lower on Michael Pittman. He finished better than where I have him ranked right now last year. I just think that the situational factors aligned perfectly for him. He had Gardner Minshew, who was a sling it type of quarterback. They threw the ball more than I think everyone was expecting. Josh Downs was a rookie. A.D. Mitchell wasn't there. They're bringing in guys. Jonathan Taylor was dealing with injuries. I think it was a perfect storm for Michael Pittman Jr. last year. It's not that I think he's bad. I just think he's a little bit overvalued at this point in time. George Pickens, he's tough, man, because if Russell Wilson and Justin Fields can play well, he could crush his ADP.
So he's very interesting for me. So for the record, the way I have it right now, the guy that was missing out of my tier above that is in this tier for the graphic because you have him a little bit lower is DK Metcalf. And I have very similar thoughts to how I view George Pickens and DK Metcalf. The difference, maybe you disagree with this because you're lower on Geno Smith. I have a lot more confidence in Geno Smith than I do the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback. So the difference is very close. We're talking about my wide receiver 23 versus my 29. And realistically in this area, wide receiver 20 through wide receiver 32 pretty much is like very, very close. But that's kind of my thoughts on it. I believe in Geno Smith a little bit more than you. I believe DK Metcalf, despite not being the overall elite target commander last year that we've seen in the past, still has that big play upside, still has that week winning potential. And I think at that point, because he can win me a week on his own and he could be the difference in my fantasy football playoffs, I'm willing to take him as more of a back end wide receiver 2 versus the high end wide receiver 3 you have him at.
Yeah, I think the thing for me with Metcalf is, number one, I think JSN's kind of lurking on his target share a little
Very
bit.
fair.
I think Lockett's obviously still there and he's fine. Like you mentioned, I'm also a little bit lower on Geno Smith. It's not like this is such a stupid argument. So don't take this at complete face value right now. But like DK Metcalf takes inconsistent to a new level, man. Like he had 4 games last year of a top 24 finish on the week. Like he is very feast or famine. It's not that I think he's a bad option. He's just a better in best ball guy, in my opinion. And Pickens is the same way. The only difference is that Pickens is like the clear number one in his offense.
The thing with DK, and again, like I am willing to draft him higher because I think the physical talent is absolutely there. And if Geno's fully healthy, if Metcalf's fully healthy, because he's also been kind of playing through injuries these last couple of years, that I think he can maybe not get back to the level of his second year, but at least get closer to it. We're kind of evaluating him right now as what he's been these last 3 years. And admittedly, he's been underwhelming compared to expectations these last 3 years. But if he just gets even closer to what he was in his second year in the league, again, is that type of DK still in the range of outcomes?
I don't think
so.
Personally.
Probably not. Can he get to 85 to 90% of that level? I think that's still possible. So that's the difference. I think it's still possible he can get 85, 90% of DK Metcalf year 2 versus you're probably thinking he's more so is what he is of the last 3 years, right?
Yeah, I think I look at Pickens was basically as good as Metcalf last year, and he's a second-year player still ascending, whereas Metcalf has been basically a 13 to 14 points per game guy for the last 3 seasons. I think that's just what he's going to be. To be honest, it's Pickens was basically that in his second season at 23 years old, though. That's kind of the difference between those two players is that even if Russell Wilson, Justin Fields are not great at quarterback and, they're worse than Geno Smith objectively, I still think being the clear number one in your offense gives Pickens the edge a little bit for me. You also have a couple like slot guys in this area here. You got Christian Kirk, who I think is just going to feast for Trevor Lawrence this year. The offense was vastly different when Christian Kirk went down. Trevor Lawrence, before his shoulder injury, the Jaguars were 8-3. Christian Kirk was on a tear. Calvin Ridley was just kind of doing his thing as a downfield player, but that's not really Calvin Ridley's role. They brought in Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr., who are both clear, like field stretching down the field guys, and it allows Christian Kirk to eat over the middle of the field. So I really, really like Christian Kirk, especially in like full PPR, 3 wide receiver leagues. You're going to get a nice little discount, 6th round pick in your redraft league on Christian Kirk as your 3rd or 4th wide receiver. And he's just going to be a consistent 14, 15 points per game. I just look at him as kind of cheaper version of like Chris Olave or DJ Moore or Amari Cooper. These guys that are the number ones of their team, you just feel really comfortable in their projection. Probably doesn't have a super high ceiling unless Lawrence were to just go bonkers this year.
Yeah, so it's funny. So, I mean, we saw last year Evan Ingram commanded 143 targets in 17 games. Calvin Ridley, again, we don't typically speak on vacated targets, but does leave behind 136. Again, we'll talk about Brian Thomas Jr. in a second. As much as I love him, I don't think he's absorbing 136 targets. We will both agree on that sentiment of him, even though we disagree on some others. Christian Kirk, he had 85 targets in the 12 games he played last year, and he played a couple of those games banged up. I believe he had the season-ending injury to his groin. He made like an extended catch, ended up missing the rest of the year. You can fact check me on that. I believe it was his groin that he ended up hurting. He's just such a safe bet. Like, we know he's going to get 8 to 9 targets. We know he's going to play that underneath role. Does he have the wide receiver 6 in fantasy ceiling? Absolutely not. But does he have a solid wide receiver 2 projection? I absolutely think so. So Christian Kirk, a guy that I'm also going to be higher on, a guy that I'm going to be attacking as a fringe top 25, top 28 type of wide receiver in my rankings. And he's just such a steady version. He's like a better version of Deontay Johnson, for example, in Carolina.
Yeah, he had 3 games last year of his 12 that he played where he was under like 12 and a half fantasy points. Like, he's just such a consistent PPR guy. And he did have some spike weeks too. I mean, he had 22 points against Kansas City in week 2. He had 16 points in week 4. He had 19 points in week 7. Like, he has spike weeks here and there. It's just, he's mainly in that 12 to 19 range. He's not going to blow up the, 25 point per games weeks like DK Metcalf would.
Well, also, fun fact, people think about Christian Kirk as like, this underneath, like Julian Edelman type of player, but on his 57 catches, 13 of them went for over 20 yards. So we're talking about a guy that, yes, he has that slot role, that underneath role, but when they need him to play that vertical slot, Tyler Lockett-esque stretch the field type of role, he's been able to do that in the last 2 years in Jacksonville.
Yeah, he was also top 5 in red zone targets in 2022. Yeah. So he was a guy that was heavily involved in the red zone. Wasn't really like that last year for whatever reason. They ran the ball a little bit more in the red zone. Lawrence tucked in and ran a couple times too. And he scored 8 touchdowns in 2022 versus just, I think, 5 or something like that this past year. So I feel good about Christian Kirk as a good value in drafts right now. I feel like nobody's really talking about him as somebody that can just feast and he actually only had 3 touchdowns this year. So not a great touchdown scoring output season for him. He definitely could have been a lot better. But I feel good that the Jags offense has a good chance to rebound. Tank Dell, the number 3 receiver of the Houston Texans that we're talking about right now, he had 16 points per game before he got hurt. It's awesome. So tough to just like look at Tank Dell and be like, yeah, he's the 3 in this offense when him and Nico Collins were neck and neck. And if not, Tank Dell was even potentially outproducing him in some cases. You just want pieces of this team. I will tell you, that's really all it comes down to.
The reason why I'm so confident on Nico Collins, and again, I've talked about this to you in the past. Yes, sure. Could Tank Dell play a couple snaps at the X? Could Stephon Diggs play a decent bit of snaps at the X? I think that's in the range of outcomes. They're going to probably interchange these guys. But the majority of the snaps at the X wide receiver, 2 wide receiver set position, I think is Nico Collins. I think the way I view this offense is Nico Collins is that number 1 boundary wide receiver, and Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell kind of use interchangeably. So the way I view it is Nico Collins to me is the clear one. And then the 2A, 2B kind of resides between Diggs and Tank Dell. I think both are going to have elite spike weeks, and they're more of, in my opinion, best ball guys that I want to attach to CJ Stroud, not guys that I want to take in the 3rd, 4th round of my redraft leagues personally.
Yeah, it's really hard to talk negatively about Tank Dell aside from there's just a lot
really
of
good player to
feed in that offense. Yeah. Like, it's just, they're all probably going to be very efficient. It's going to be kind of like the 49ers. It's like, you just want pieces of this team. Is there a chance that Brandon Ayuk would have been better last year had Debo missed the whole season? Abso-freaking-lutely. He would have been way better if that happened. But you also kind of want all these guys on the field together, because that means Stroud is just going to be wheeling and dealing. Whoever's open, get the ball. Like, they're just going to be like points per drive and like success rate. Their offense is going to be the best in the league, probably, as a passing unit, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely going to be up there. I mean, they're talent-wise, I mean, we're talking about elite quarterback, arguably the best wide receiver trio in the league.
Definitely the best wide receiver trio in the league, in my opinion.
Like, because I think people might argue, well, like, technically Nico's not the strongest one. So in conjunction, if you compare it to like I don't know, like Tyreek Hill plus Jalen Waddle plus if they had a third guy, that was just like hypothetical. But if there's a team with like a worse wide receiver 3, but a better wide receiver 1, some people
like the Bengals, for example, if Jermaine Burton hits or something.
Exactly, right? So like I can see people making that argument, but regardless, like in terms of just the overall floor of that wide receiver room, knowing that you have 3 just stud players in that core, even if Nico, I think he could be a superstar, but is not technically classified as one at this current point. Sure, but regardless, CJ Stroud is going to be willing to deal, and I want pieces of this offense.
Yeah, and Jaden Reed, too, is one guy that I find myself getting higher and higher on.
Same.
You know, like Jaden Reed had 7 of his last 9 games over 15 PPR points?
Yeah,
to close out the season last year. He was unbelievable down the stretch. And I don't know what to expect from the Packers receiver core. I don't think anybody does, to be honest. This is going to be the one that you follow closely during the preseason, seeing, who's getting the snaps with the ones, and in the preseason games, who's out there in 2 wide receiver sets and who's out there in 3 wide receiver sets and all that kind of stuff. Because Jayden Reed, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks, all 4 of them can play. The question is, who's going to end up being the most productive of this group? My guess would be Jayden Reed, because he's getting design touches. He had like 200 rushing yards and like 2 touchdowns last year on the ground. He also just was very productive, very efficient. He was a rookie last year and he was super efficient. But the other thing is like, well, what if Christian Watson doesn't have spaghetti hamstrings? Is he going to go back to being the number 1 of this team? I'm not exactly sure what to expect from this Packers receiver core. It's just like a very watered down version of the Texans. It's like, I just want pieces of it.
And it's funny because you didn't even mention a guy like Dontavian Wicks, who really, really showed out at certain points when he got the opportunity last year. I think, like to a lower level, like Bo Melton looked good.
Yeah,
like,
well, and the tight ends
like,
too, and Josh Jacobs.
Draft Jordan Love. Draft Jordan Love.
Draft Jordan Love. Exactly. Draft Jordan and Jacobs too, honestly, because Jacobs doesn't have that much competition in the backfield, at least in my opinion. And he's going to be the beneficiary of all of these guys helping him move the ball down the field and getting him red zone opportunities. I like Jayden Reed and Josh Jacobs the most of this Packers team in terms of who I'm drafting right now in best ball, or who I would love to draft in redraft leagues. And also, like, for what it's worth, the reason best ball was invented was so you didn't have to make lineup decisions. And the Packers receiver core is quite literally the best example of why I would love to draft them in best ball.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, speaking of rooms I would rather draft in best ball, we could just talk about the final name that we haven't really discussed much here with Rome Odunze. I think the market agrees, and we agree, that DJ Moore is pretty clearly the one, at least for Rome Odunze's rookie season. But after that, who's going to outproduce who? Keenan Allen or Rome Odunze? People may see from a baseline projection standpoint, trusting the slot role for Keenan Allen over the course of the entire year, he probably projects better than Rome Odunze. The reason why I would take Rome Odunze is, who is more likely to win me my league when I'm outside of the top 30 wide receivers? Is it going to be the top 10 overall elite superstar prospect, or is it going to be the 33-year-old on a 1-year deal?
Yeah, it's hard because, like, if you're just doing projections, there's no way you should draft Rome Odunze over Keenan Allen, because Keenan Allen's probably going to have more targets, at least early on in the season, and early season production matters, especially because me and you trade 100%. All the time, and you definitely want guys that get out to good starts and that kind of thing. But yeah, I think Odunze is, especially in best ball, these big tournaments where all the money is at the top, like that's where you got to be taking your shots on Rome Odunze, because if there's injuries, Keenan Allen's been injured, DJ Moore has suffered some injuries. Like, if Caleb plays, like, Caleb can play, and we both think he could come out
Superstar.
Guns a-blazing. And him and Odunze are establishing a connection right from jump, right? They're in mini camps, rookie mini camps together. They came in the same draft class. I'm sure they were hanging out off campus.
They were literally training before the draft.
Exactly. They love each other, obviously. And when you're a quarterback and a wide receiver, sometimes it's just like you have the connection, you have it rolling, you have it firing. And I think Rome Odunze is the type of guy that, at the point, like you said, where you're drafting him, 5th, 6th, 7th round, depending on your league format, you want to take that shot, because you probably already have a couple good receivers on your team already.
And that's what we'll talk about some of the other rookies in the next tier. I'm a little bit higher on the rookies respectively than you are. And that's kind of what it comes back to. Like, I feel very comfortably that I can find wide receiver 3s, productive, solid wide receiver 4 floor types later in the draft or through my free agent pool. When I'm drafting after wide receiver 30, after wide receiver 32, I'm drafting straight for ceiling. And we may as well just transition straight into the next tier so you guys can see what we're talking about here. This next tier, we mentioned the aforementioned Keenan Allen. I feel like, again, he was the wide receiver 3 in points per game. It would be disrespectful not to have him at least in this tier. I mean, some of you in the comment section might tell us.
People are going to be mad, I think.
Here. Yeah.
People are going to be mad. I expect that. He's going to be he's got to be in the same tier as DJ Moore. He's got to be way ahead of Rome Odunze. I wouldn't think that's a terrible argument. I think the way that we draft teams, by the time you're at this point in the draft, in the 5th, 6th round, we probably already have multiple receivers on our team. And if I took a lot of risk early, maybe that's when I would take a Keenan Allen. But for the most part, I'd be okay just, drafting my safe receivers early, or my easy projections early, and then swinging for ceiling come round 6, come round 7. So Keenan Allen kind of fits into that perspective. Calvin Ridley too. I mean, I kind of know what to expect from Calvin Ridley. I don't think he's got a super high ceiling as I did last year, like on Jacksonville. I think Tennessee could be a good team. They could surprise some people, but I think Calvin Ridley's ceiling is probably like 15, 16 points per game. I don't think he's going to go any higher than that unless Will Levis is just a fucking superstar.
Yeah, no, I agree with that as well. Like we're kind of mixing this tier between like the safe projections with a guy like, Calvin Ridley, Keenan Allen. I would argue, I mean, it's crazy that he's a young guy, but I would argue that Jordan Addison is more so a safe projection rather than a overall ceiling projection based off the rookie quarterback there. I think he's a good enough player to be a wide receiver 3. I don't know if he can reach wide receiver 1 territory. The rookies are the one that interests me, and JSN as well, because like you said with the DK Metcalf piece, like there's still a range of outcomes where he is the number 1 target on the team. And if JSN is the number 1 target on the Seattle Seahawks, he's going to finish much higher than whatever that is, wide receiver 35 or 36 we have him ranked. He's probably going to be a top 20, top 24 guy at the minimum, if that was the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially knowing that JSN fits what Geno does well, which is like, take the easy stuff, get first downs, that kind of thing. If JSN plays better this year, because it was on him last year, in my opinion, it's not the scheme. It's not, like he's got to play better. He's got to outplay Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf in game, in practices to earn those targets. If he does, which he can do, he's definitely one of the top prospects we've seen over the last couple of years and had a solid enough rookie season, showed you enough to make you think that you can, build upon that. He has a chance to really return on his ADP. You can get him at like 7th, 8th round sometimes as like your wide receiver 4, your wide receiver 5, and he has a chance to return some value. From a dynasty perspective, I also have gotten a little bit higher on him, potentially returning a lot of value because of the pre-draft notion of what we had of this guy. If he turns into even like a DJ Moore, like if he turns into DJ Moore and has DJ Moore's exact career arc, there'll be points in time where you could sell him for a lot more than what DJ Moore has given you in terms of production, because we all want to love JSN because that's what we thought of him coming out of school. Jordan Addison is super weird, man. I can't put my finger on him right now because it's so hard to think that he's not going to get out to a nice start with TJ Hawkinson potentially on the mend early on. But at the same time, what if Sam Darnold is his quarterback for the first 5 games? Or what if, JJ McCarthy's a rookie and he starts from week 1 and he's not really producing at a high level? I think that the Vikings are going to be in a bit of a slow start transitionary period for the first 6 to 8 weeks. And it makes me like not want to draft their players and potentially buy low on them. And that includes Jefferson too.
Yeah, for sure. And it's actually funny with with Jordan Addison, because this is a guy that, I mean, we watched him as a prospect both at Pitt and at USC. We thought he was a very refined route runner, but it's kind of funny because in his rookie season, like he was more so just a ball winner. Like when the ball was up in the air, he was coming down with it despite his small frame. And people kind of question his ability because he's like, oh, he's this wiry wide receiver. Like the guy's got Devontae Smith level instincts when the ball is in the air, despite the size. Some guys just have that dog factor you can't teach. Now, the separation was a concern for me because Matt Harmon actually did chart his reception perception from his rookie season. 29th percentile against man, 60th percentile against zone, 12th percentile against press. He needs to be better, point blank simple, at separating on a consistent basis for him to finish higher than we have him ranked. And again, this is a guy that was my wide receiver 1 in last year's cycle. This is a guy I have full belief getting back to that level that I think he was as a prospect. But his rookie season as a separator it concerns me. It concerns me. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I'm not going to flat out say like, oh, I am not concerned about Jordan Addison based off what I analyzed for him as a prospect. When he separated at this below average, this subpar level, when I thought he was this elite separator coming in.
Yeah, it's like I hope they continue to use him in like a big slot, not a big slot, but like a slot role where he can work against zone coverage and maybe be like an Amon-Ra of this offense to go along with Jefferson. That would be his best utilization. That's what Harmon said about him as a prospect coming out, and that's basically what materialized his rookie season. So hopefully and thankfully he is in the right scheme for what he does well. And I think he can still be productive. I'm just concerned of how good the offense is actually going to be early on in the season specifically. As a late season play, I think he'll be fine.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of Amon-Ra, I mean, we can just go into straight the rookie wide receivers. We'll talk about Ladd McConkey first because you mentioned the name Amon-Ra, and that's basically the role you're expecting from in this offense. It's already been reported apparently in OTAs. He's been working out of the slot, which makes sense. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh coming over. Who was his most valuable wide receiver at Michigan, and what role did he play on the offense?
Yeah, it was Roman Wilson, and Ladd McConkey's significantly better than Roman Wilson. So it's a great fit for the offense. Justin Herbert, maybe contrary to popular belief, is not a gunslinger. He's not the type of quarterback that's pushing it down the field despite his big arm. He actually is kind of a conservative passer. So him having Ladd McConkey makes some sense. Just get the first downs, get the PPR targets. I mean, you just mentioned Keenan Allen was like a top 5 receiver when he was on the field in PPR last year. I'm not saying Ladd McConkey's going to walk right into Keenan Allen's role, but if anybody's going to do it, it probably is going to be Ladd McConkey in that receiving core.
Yeah, so for reference, again, I kind of maneuvered my tiers as we were talking because, you think about more things. This tier for me, so Keenan Allen ended it off at 33 for me. 34 JSN, 35 Calvin Ridley, 36 Ladd. I have my boy Brian Thomas, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Your boy Xavier Worthy at 38. Jordan Addison 39. We're not talking about Hollywood Brown yet, but he would be my 40. And then we'll talk about another rookie in a second that is at my 41 spot. But you could talk about your boy Xavier Worthy. I'll talk about my guy Brian Thomas Jr. And after that, we can pretty much go into the next year.
Yeah, so with Worthy, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's the offense in Kansas City needed a field stretching element, and Xavier Worthy is precisely that as a 4-2-1 receiver, but he can do a lot more than that. He's not just a field stretcher, and I think that's what's going to really appeal to Patrick Mahomes. Again, if I trust anybody to develop this receiver, he's really young, really raw, but he knows how to play ball. He is a clear ball player. He's not just a speed guy. Andy Reid will know how to coach this guy up. And Patrick Mahomes will know how to coach this guy up from the quarterback position. So I feel really good about Worthy. Maybe he gets off to a slower start, and I'll talk about that with your boy Brian Thomas as well. But I do think Xavier Worthy is the type of guy that can win people leagues, especially when you're getting him 7th, 8th round in most redraft leagues. On Underdog, you got to take him a little bit higher for stacking purposes, but I do think in many redraft leagues, he won't be like a significantly higher pick than like 7th, 8th round.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Again, the concerns early season, I would say he's very similar to Hollywood Brown. Heck, that was literally my comparison for him in the draft. Ends up being on the exact same team as Hollywood. I do think, at least in the early portion, we know Pacheco's going to get a lot of volume out of the backfield in the running game. We also saw his target share also increase at the end of last season. So I think he's, instead of maybe the 1 to 3 target player that we saw at the early portion, maybe figures into that 2 to 5 target per game range. Hollywood Brown, I think, is a proven target earner. Travis Kelce, potentially the greatest tight end of all time. And although he wasn't quite, prime Travis Kelce last year, was still one of the best tight ends in the league. So I think a guy like Xavier Worthy is a guy that, like I'll mention with Brian Thomas Jr., once you reach week 6, week 7, week 8, they start getting even more improved usage in the offense and can be absolute league winners down the stretch. But if you're drafting these rookie wide receivers to be your wide receiver 3 off the start, I wouldn't advocate for that. These are more so guys where if you drafted your CeeDee Lamb, Nico Collins, maybe another safe guy like, I don't know, Christian Kirk in the middle of the 5th round of your draft, and you want to mix in some upside with a Brian Thomas, with an Xavier Worthy, that's the type of wide receiver structure for my room that I'd be adding these guys in. Because like I said, although they may not be productive earlier in the year, I absolutely think by week 6, by week 7, both respectively, can be legit league winners down the stretch.
Yeah, I mean, the difference for me, because I have BTJ like probably 5 to 10 spots lower than you do. I just, as a prospect, I viewed him as a raw player, and I think it's a great fit for him long-term from a dynasty perspective. I just think early on in his career, in 2 wide receiver sets, it's going to be Gabe Davis and Christian Kirk. Him and Gabe Davis play a similar role. Of course, Brian Thomas is bigger. He's faster. He's got more upside, all that kind of stuff. And I don't disagree with you that come week 6, week 7 and beyond, he could be a great, down the stretch dude. I just think it's going to take him a little bit of time. I viewed him as a bit of a raw prospect. I viewed him as the type of guy that might take a little bit of time developing in the NFL. He's the type of guy, in my opinion, from a dynasty perspective, I know we're talking redraft, but this applies to redraft as well, that after the season is over, we're like, man, look how he closed out the season. Look what his target rate was, not his actual target share. When he was on the field running routes, look at his target rate. Look at some of the yards per route run metrics. Like, he's the type of guy that I think will pop in the advanced metrics because he was efficient, but maybe not week 1, day 1, running 85, 90% of the routes for the team and, having 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns.
So, I mean, I would agree it's more of a slow burn. The difference is I do feel like once he ends up hitting that 85, 90+% snap share, his touchdown equity in an offense that I believe in, you believe in, Trevor Lawrence, a guy that I think we talked about a short list of guys that maybe could hit 40 touchdowns. If we're talking just straight 30 touchdowns, I absolutely think Trevor Lawrence is on that short list. And if Trevor Lawrence is throwing 30 touchdowns, like the 6'3", 200+ pound, 17 touchdown scorer in the SEC last year is going to have a sizable chunk of that touchdown equity. So again, I agree. Maybe weeks 1 to 5, it kind of looks similar to what Rashee Rice was in the Kansas City Chiefs last year. But I do think the way Rashee Rice finished the season for the Chiefs could be in the range of outcomes for a guy like Brian Thomas Jr. And if you guys forget just how good Rashee Rice was down the stretch, like he was the legitimate wide receiver one. Now, if Brian Thomas Jr. is a wide receiver one, I'd be extremely happy, even if that's just more so, hey, he's the wide receiver 15 down the stretch and he's winning you leagues past week 7, week 8, week 9. That's worthwhile for me in the 6th, 7th round area.
Yeah, and it's similar to what I said with the Packers receivers and stuff. I think, preseason usage and stuff will make me either higher
100%.
or lower on BTJ, and I would like to see how he looks in preseason games and that kind of thing, just because I viewed him as a raw prospect. So if he comes in, he looks a little bit better, and he did a lot of work in the offseason leading up to the draft, and then, training camp was very informative for him and that kind of thing, then maybe I'd get a little bit higher on him. But for now, he needs to come in a range where I'm not drafting sure things anymore. I'm drafting upside, because that's what he represents to me. It's like, would I rather have Chris Godwin or Brian Thomas Jr.? It would depend on my team. Like, if I need wide receiver production right away, I would rather have Chris Godwin. But at the same time, if I'm in the 7th round, 8th round, I probably already have a lot of players already. So it's fine. To me, it's fine if you want to take BTJ that high. I just think it would really depend on my build and how deep my wide receiver core needs to be. Can I start 3 wide receivers, 2 flex in a full PPR league? To me, it's like you need some sure things in that situation. I'd be okay just taking a Chris Godwin, a Deontay Johnson, a Terry McLaurin over him.
Hey, I think that's respectable once you're in the mid-range. Usually you want to wear a condom, you want to play it safe, but sometimes you just got to raw dog a BTJ, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair. So let's rattle off the final tier of this video, talking about Marquise Brown, who you mentioned could get out to a hot start in Kansas City. Chris Godwin, who I just mentioned, could be a solid PPR guy, has been for years. Terry McLaurin, pretty much a consistent 12 to 13 points per game, nothing more, nothing
same
less.
With
Deontay, same with him as well. Keon Coleman, who I'm sure you were referencing before with one of your rookie wide receivers, could end up being the number 1 there. In Buffalo, DeAndre Hopkins, a little bit older, cheaper version, essentially, of like what we talked about with Stephon Diggs with Tennessee. He's probably him and Ridley. I wouldn't be shocked if Hopkins outproduced Ridley. I wouldn't be totally shocked by that, but I do think Ridley should be the number 1 there. Rashee Rice, this is for legal reasons why he's down there. We think he's going to get suspended. If he wasn't going to get suspended, he's probably in that Amari Cooper, Devontae Smith territory, I would say.
Maybe even higher. Okay, I was actually going to ask you this question. Over under wide receiver 18 for Rashee Rice.
I would put him over that, I think.
So you're more so like wide receiver 22, 23 then?
Yeah, like I think I would prefer Higgins, Smith, and Cooper, and then he would be right there with Flowers, I would say. Like,
for me, again, maybe because there's more target competition with Hollywood and Xavier, you kind of have to bump
He's also just a bit of a knucklehead too, so I factor
That's
in
fair.
knucklehead bias as well.
That's fair. Regardless, though, like whether it's a top 20 or top 25, if you guys are Rashee Rice fans, I will let this be known. He's down here because he's just a knucklehead and has already gotten into legal issues. If he gets suspended, this is about the type of range that I'd be willing to take the plunge. If he doesn't get suspended, we can revisit his placing on this list.
Yeah, Christian Watson is just a total ceiling play. To me, I view him and Brian Thomas very similar, even though one's a rookie and one's going into his 3rd season. I just think the ceiling is pretty similar for both guys. Christian Watson, in my opinion, has even better chance to become the number 1 of his team versus Brian Thomas, who I think Christian Kirk is a little bit more to overcome than Jaden Reed and some of the other guys. Christian Watson was the number 1 coming into last season for the Packers, right? Like I thought there was a real, like we look at Jordan Love, how good of a season he had last year, and his number 1 receiver, who at least we projected to be his number 1 receiver entering the year, wasn't even healthy.
Yeah, again, we're not going to rehash Brian Thomas Jr., but I just keep coming back to the fact that if the guy plays like the player that I think he can be, he's close to being the wide receiver 1 on that team. And I love Christian Kirk. I think he's a solid slot wide receiver, but it's kind of similar, in my opinion, to what like George Pickens and Deontay Johnson were in Pittsburgh, where the talent, in my opinion, resides with Brian Thomas, aka George Pickens, but maybe the target share, the overall involvement in the offense leans itself to Deontay Johnson, a la Christian Kirk. And by year 2 of Brian Thomas Jr., you kind of see that pendulum flip.
Yeah, that could make some sense there. And then Cortland Sutton closing out our top 48, just total vanilla milkshake type of draft pick where you're probably getting 12 points per game and 8 touchdowns or whatever. But
he'll score in 80% of his games and not do much else.
Yeah, but you know what? That if you're in a deep league, 3 wide receiver, 2 flex PPR league, and you get him in the 9th round or the 8th round or something, that might actually be decent, especially if you take a swing on like JSN or Rome Odunze or Brian Thomas Jr. earlier on in your draft. You might need a guy like Cortland Sutton or Jacoby Myers or somebody like that who might be going a little bit later than this. So that is the end of the video. We went really long on this one. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hopefully you liked the back and forth. This was our top 48 wide receivers, early redraft wide receiver rankings tier list. We did running backs a couple days ago. If you guys want to check that out, we'll be doing quarterbacks and tight ends as well. I'm currently in Europe as you guys are watching this, so we kind of pre-recorded this. If there was anything that we talked about that's outdated because somebody got injured or somebody had more legal trouble, God forbid, maybe Rashee Rice has received a suspension or something, just let us know down below. We did record this probably about a week earlier than we put it out. So yeah, if you enjoyed, like, comment, subscribe, check out Underdog Fantasy to put some of this advice into action. Go in, enter some Best Ball Mania 5 drafts, some of the best values, at least in my opinion, based on the guys that we've talked about. T. Higgins to me sticks out as one. Christian Kirk sticks out as one. Jaden Reed sticks out as one on Underdog right now. The rookies are going pretty high, but I do think you can still get an edge come training camp. If we're getting buzz about Xavier Worthy, BTJ, or Ladd McConkey, their prices will still go up in Underdog Fantasy draft. So if you want to be involved in those, promo code FSE for $250 up in total bets, and then also to a free pick'em special when you sign up. Get into Best Ball Mania 5, 1.5 million to first, 15 million in total prizes. Get into Pomeranian drafts going live right now, $3 entry if you guys are more lower stakes players. And again, remember to use that promo code FSE. But with that being said, peace out. We'll talk to you soon.